Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Migration Amendment Regional Processing Cohort Bill 2016. Mr Deputy Speaker, from day one of the coalition government, we've made it an absolute priority to have strong border protection. Strong border protection, ensuring that we decide as a government how people come to this country, and it's working extremely well. Of course, this bill will further strengthen that and ensure that it continues to work well, not just now, but well into the future. Every day we need to continue to deliver on this promise to provide secure borders and in this country. In fact, it's working so well, Mr Deputy Speaker, that there hasn't been a single boat arrival in the last 830 days. Now, we go back to 2013. You remember there were a few of them rocking up every day at one stage. It was unbelievable. And we went into the 2013 election, of course, with the three-line slogan that those opposite used to like to talk about, that was stopping the boats. So they said it couldn't be done. They said it would never be done and it couldn't be done. It's all just words. But here we are, not one boat arrival in 830 days. But it gets worse, because when you go back to 2007, when Labor took office, there was no boats coming either after the Howard government, after the many successful years of the Howard government, 11 years of the Howard government. How many people were in detention then, member for Riverina? It was 4, I think. 4 in 2007. That's right. Do you know how many children, Mr Deputy Speaker, were in detention when I was elected in 2013? Almost 2,000. Almost 2,000. Labor have learnt nothing in the last few years after their abysmal record of 6 years in government. Clearly, Mr Deputy Speaker, our strong border protection policies have sent a message to people smugglers that life in Australia is not a commodity to be sold at a profit to the desperate and vulnerable. Illegal immigration, of course, is a worldwide problem. In 2016, we are seeing the worst of this in Europe, and I believe it was a big factor in the recent Brexit vote and, of course, in today's US election. Our border protection policies have been so successful that other countries, including in Europe, Great Britain, are looking to us going, "What have you done there? How did you implement those policies that are working so well? We need to do the same here." However, as Immigration Minister Peter Dutton said today, the member for Dixon, we cannot afford to become complacent, Mr Deputy Speaker. We cannot become complacent. Now is not the time to send a message to the people smugglers and to the Australian people that the Australian government will go soft on this issue or that we are complacent on this issue. The bill before the House today will amend the Migration Act to further strengthen Australia's migration border protection arrangements. The purpose is to reinforce the government's long-standing policy that people who travel here illegally by boat will never be settled in Australia. And of course we know it's long-standing. This policy position the coalition government have had since around 2000. Remember the Tampa in 2001 when the Howard government is in office. It's almost 2017. We haven't changed. The Labor Party, on the other hand, Mr Deputy Speaker, they are all over the place. All over the place. The most wishy-washy government and opposition ever that's caused a major disaster in those 6 years of government. So, Mr Speaker, and the member for Franklin was there and part of that government, Mr Deputy Speaker, one of the members that weakened TPVs, that weakened everything, the Pacific solution that Howard had in place. I wouldn't be interjecting if I was her. Labor's legacy, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are many differences between the coalition government and Labor. And while the coalition acts in the best interests of Australian people, Labor does not. They don't act in the best interests of Australian people on this issue. They're too interested in what everyone else thinks. And in the issue relating to illegal maritime arrivals, that's why they don't want to, it looks like, support the bill from what the members opposite have said today. We need to, of course, look at their record over their time in government. Some 50,000 illegal maritime arrivals came on over 800 boats. As I said before, some 8,000 children through detention. Reopened, the Labor government, 17 detention centres and 2 offshore detention centres in Nauru and PNG. We know that there was at least 1,200 deaths at sea that we know of, and there was some an $11 billion blowout in border protection policies. Mr Bill Shorten, the Leader of the Opposition, talks about people smuggling and the need for resettlement, Mr Deputy Speaker, as though he and Labor have no responsibility in the facts and figures that I just read out, and that they have no responsibility for offshore processing and detention. But they have absolute responsibility. They have absolute responsibility. Let's not forget that in May 2008, the Rudd government announced that it would abolish the system of temporary protection, just out of the blue, when previously the former Prime Minister Rudd said that they wouldn't do that. They were on a unity ticket with us. But in May 2008, they abolished the temporary protection system. The TPV system was formally ended by amendments to the migration regulations on the 9th of August 2008, and those Labor members elected in 2007, including the current Shadow Minister, said nothing about it, just supported it, let it go through. Let it go through. We know what happened afterwards. And now it seems, after listening to the Shadow Minister today and other members opposite, they've learnt nothing in that time, absolutely nothing. What are their excuses for not supporting this amendment, this important amendment that will send the strongest of signals that our borders are secure? Well, the Leader of the Opposition spoke the other day and spoke about genuine refugees and said that all the people coming by boat were genuine. Now, we know that that's not the case. 2 people in my electorate alone, both men from Iran. One's a young guy, about 27 years of age. He came by boat before 2013, so he wouldn't be affected by this policy. He's currently on a TPV in the Australian community. He's just moved into a regional area. But I spoke to him, Ahmed, and I said, well, mate, what was the issue? He said he was being persecuted in Iran because of his political beliefs, or he was about to be. I said, OK, so what did you do from there? He went to neighbouring countries, I think it was Egypt, and lived there for 12 months. And then he moved down to Indonesia and flew to Indonesia and spent more time there, another 12, 18 months. And then eventually he paid around 10,000 Australian dollars to come to Australia by boat. And I said, well, look, when you were in Indonesia and in Egypt, were you being persecuted there? And he said, oh, no, I wasn't. This is a nice young guy, but he said he wasn't being persecuted. I said, well, why did you then pay a people smuggler, illegally pay a people smuggler to come to Australia by boat? And he said, well, look, I just wanted him to come. I just wanted to come. And I can't blame him. Of course, people want to come to Australia because we have the greatest country in the world. I understand that. But I said to him, I said, I mean, that's the illegal part, mate. You can't actually pay a people smuggler. It's against the law to pay a people smuggler to come to Australia by boat. And I don't blame him for wanting to come. But 1,200 of his fellow travellers died at sea, drowned at sea because of Labor's changes. And we must send a signal that this wasn't here. You don't have to worry about it. You weren't here at the time. I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming all the other 2007 members that were elected at the time, Mr Conroy. But look, the other thing that Bill Shorten, the Leader of the Opposition, says is that he's worried that the citizens of the US and Canada may face a ban, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I spoke on this yesterday on a 90-second statement and said, Bill, you don't represent the people of the US or Canada. You don't represent those people. You actually represent Australians in your electorate. And obviously he's opposition leader and wants to be Prime Minister. He's got to learn that he represents Australians and he's got to look after Australians. He's not here to look after the interests of US or Canadian citizens. You know, He's totally mixed up. I know he couldn't help himself with intervening in this current US election and some of the disgraceful comments he made in relation to the Republican candidate, who may well just be president in a few hours from now, the next president, and I'm sure that'll come back to bite him. But he's got to learn that he's here to represent the Australian people. Yeah, here to represent the Australian people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill will prevent unauthorised maritime arrivals who are at least 18 years of age and were taken to a regional processing country after the 19th of July 2013 from making a valid application for an Australian visa. The amendments will also apply to transitionary persons who are at least 18 years of age and were taken to a regional processing country after that date. The amendments will include ministerial discretion, where the minister will be able to permit a member of a class of people within the designated regional processing cohort to make a valid application for a visa if the minister thinks it's in the public interest to do so. And this is important because there are sometimes cases that are so important that it's not possible to assess them under a standard piece of legislation. And the Shadow Minister, when he spoke on this, all he could do was criticise the current minister as though, just went to town on him as though that was important. Given that he was elected in 2007 and responsible for much of the chaos, I just found it outrageous. But the current minister has a strong record. He's got a very strong record. And I'm sure that future ministers from whatever government could make the right decision when it came to ministerial intervention in these matters. The minister made some contributions on this bill when he presented it to the House. And he said, notwithstanding the success of Operation Sovereign Daughters, people smugglers will continue to take advantage of vulnerable people by trying to convince them to get on boats for Australia and risk their lives at sea. This bill will further undercut the people smugglers' business model. It will communicate unequivocally to the 14,000 people currently waiting in Indonesia to board a people smuggling boat that they will never settle in Australia. The bill will communicate to illegal maritime arrivals on regional processing countries that they will never settle permanently in Australia, no matter what advocates or others may tell them. And that's an important point, to stop people languishing on offshore detention centres set up by Labor for so long because some advocates might say, just wait it out, just wait it out. The government will change, or the borders, they'll weaken their border protection policies and you'll be allowed in. This will send the strongest of messages, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Australian government is serious about protecting our borders, maintaining our sovereignty and the interests of Australian people. And I know for a fact that the majority of people in my electorate of Peachtree want to see our borders protected. And I think those opposite, and perhaps some of the crossbench senators, would also know that in their states and in their seats that the support for this measure is important. Mr Deputy Speaker, in stark contrast to Labor, the Australian government, the federal coalition government, has stopped the boats. They've closed 17 detention centres. They've moved thousands of children out of detention. And they've been able, as a result, to increase our refugee intake, including recently for 12,000 additional Syrians. For those people that are absolutely in fear of their life because of ISIL at the moment in Syria and Iraq, these people ISIL is slaughtering on a daily basis because why? Because they're Christians or something? Unbelievable. And now our refugee intake will enable them in instead of IMAs. And this is a very important bill to make sure that the message is sent clearly, Mr Deputy Speaker. So I thank the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection for his work on this bill. The Coalition will get on with the job and I commend the bill to the House.